of education to career navigation. I'm Julie Lammers. I'm the Executive Vice President of American Student Assistance. And our focus is on ensuring young people have the opportunity to understand their career, their education and career opportunities, and then navigate to post-secondary education and career success. And the conversation today is really based on a lot of work that we're doing right now to help understand how we can better provide resources and tools to young people as they're making the crucial decisions in the later high school years about what comes next after high school. That landscape has changed dramatically. We know kids are making vastly different decisions today than they have in the past, and that they are confused and unsure of really how to navigate this changing landscape of post-secondary education choices. So the organizations with us today are on a mission to change some of that and to provide the types of resources and supports to young people that they need to be successful long-term. So I'm excited for this conversation. A quick introduction. So we have with us today Connor Harrington, the CEO of Cooter. Next is Maria Groark, the Managing Director of the Schultz Family Foundation, Dan Fisher, President and CEO of the ECMC Group, and last but not least, Jane Swift, President of Education at Work. Those are your names and your organizations. I'd love for you to introduce yourselves briefly, tell us a little bit about what your organization does, and I'd also like to understand what was your personal career navigation journey when you were in high school, and what tools did you have? Or lack of tools that you had. So let's start with you, Connor.
Alrighty. Hello, my name is Connor Harrington. I'm the CEO of Cooter. Our organization is an ed tech organization that supports all things related to career development. How do we get individuals into the right fit career? That can look like a lot of different things for a lot of different people, and so we aim to have our technologies and our services scale with the specific use cases that we are faced with. So whether it's a K-12 college and career readiness system through a school district, or if it's a workforce readiness program to help unemployed get back to work, our mission is really how do you help support more direct intervention of career development at scale. It's very difficult to replicate what a one-on-one coach could do with an individual at scale, so we aim to bring tools and resources together to make that happen. My personal career journey, I never wanted to go to college. I grew up around ed tech and had family members in ed tech, but I was cutting down trees at 16 and was making more money than I knew what to do with at the time, and I said, why don't I just keep doing this? There was heavy encouragement from others that I should consider a four-year degree. You know, that was the big push around the time I was going to school. And so I went with that, and I did it in conjunction with using the Cooter assessments. So I actually took the Cooter assessments when I was in high school, and my results were a little bit unique because it showed that I had an experience across kind of every cluster pretty even. And I didn't know what to do with that. You know, I'm sitting there saying, well, great, nothing's a standout for me. And over the years, I had access to good coaches, good mentors, and they helped me understand that, hey, there's a lot of things you could do, but there's some other things around that, work values, what are some of the skills you have today, and really decided, okay, entrepreneurship was the right route for me, so I went to school for entrepreneurship. So school ended up being a good option for me, but the entrepreneurship program gave me the balance of being able to be flexible and hands-on with the program that I was looking for. So I had great support. I had some good tools. I see the tools that are out there today, and there's a lot of good things, but our big mission is how do you get kids access to those tools? So we can pump out a lot of good content. We're going to hear about that today from the rest of the panelists. But if the student doesn't have access to it when they need it, it may be too late before they take a route that's not the good fit for them.
Great, thanks, Connor. Marie.
Hi, great to see everyone here today. I, as Julie mentioned, am Managing Director at the Schultz Family Foundation, and at the Schultz Family Foundation, we believe in creating opportunity accessible to all. And our primary focus has long been on the transition from adolescence to adulthood. So we think about that 16 to 24-year-old time frame. And we've long been focused on the kids for whom the traditional sort of, I'd say, navigation pathways have been embedded for at least a decade or two, which is going from high school to college to career. We think about the young people for whom the journey is not as linear, that it might be high school to college to career back to college, it might be high school to career, and how do we create navigation pathways and tools and resources for those young people? I'd also say, and we'll talk about this a little bit today, is that because our DNA is Starbucks, we come with an employer mindset. Oftentimes, employers are the last people at the table, and we want to build from the employer forward. And we've learned a lot on that journey, which we'll share a little bit today about. In terms of my own journey, I was thinking as folks were talking about that, and I thought, first of all, of the assessment that I took in high school, which suggested that I be a hotel front desk clerk. And that continues to be an aspiration. I tell my husband at any time.
There's still time.
I'll be down at that front desk there checking you in next year. Like very happy and go lucky for about 10 minutes, and then things start to break down. Is that like why I got that? But then I decided through my own experience that I wanted to go to college, and I decided I wanted to be in social work. And I went to college, went into that field, and took a class, and it was the professor in that class who said, that's great that you want to do that, but you can actually have more impact if you think about other careers. And then she started explaining to me the other careers. And so I really think about, what does that look like when someone who has more knowledge, information, and influence that you do recognizes your potential when you have not yet recognized your potential. And that's often how we think about our work at the Schultz Family Foundation.
Thanks, Marie. Dan.
Never give up on your dreams. We'll get you like an application for Marriott and just say, case of emergency, break glass. I'm Dan Fisher. I'm the president and CEO of ECMC Group. We're a national nonprofit that's focused on helping underserved students get to and through and beyond their post-secondary journey. And we do that in a variety of ways. Through our operating public charity, we have an impact investing fund that supports entrepreneurs and innovators in the space. We also have a large and growing foundation that is really focused on changing the ecosystem so that the college completion gap between folks like my children and folks that don't look like my children are closing by 2040. That's where we spend our time and energy. And in terms of my personal journey, I have teenagers and college students at home, and they remind me that I went to school in the 1900s. So we didn't have AI, we didn't have internet, we didn't have any of that stuff. And I was a low-income, first-generation college student. And so this trajectory of going to college was not in my DNA, was not in my home life. I have 30 cousins, and I was the first one to go to college. And it really was that under-resourced, overworked college counselor at St. Paul Central High School who was tasked with finding the folks among a very large urban high school who would have the opportunity to succeed. And it was Miss McWatt who helped figure out how to get me from where I was to that first step on the college-going ladder. And so that's something that I think a lot about, and big shout out to Miss McWatt at St. Paul Central High School for getting me on this pathway.
Thanks. I'll play off of Dan's story in a minute, but I'm Jane Swift, and I currently run Education at Work. We work at the intersection as an intermediary between Fortune 500 companies and college students, and often in partnership with their universities. If you think of the spectrum that Julie just talked about, and my colleagues here are all contributing to, we want to take students from career exploration, where they explore their passion, their purpose, what they're good at, what their skills can make them be successful at, whether it's a front desk clerk or running a foundation, and then bring them all the way to career success. And we're at the end of that pipeline, and what we have increasingly noticed is that for many students, including those who are focused on a career that requires a college degree, whether you take a pathway directly into college or circuitously through college or not college at all, you're going to need work experience, you're going to need certain technical skills, and then you're going to need a set of durable skills that help you to land that good first job. And most students who are going into college are not cognizant of the fact that when they get to their senior year and start applying, or their final fourth year, and start applying for jobs, that many of the jobs they're applying for are going to require that they have 2, or now I'm hearing even 3 years of relevant experience. And so our mission is to provide the most underserved students. 80% of the students we serve are students of color, 50% are first gen, 50% are in Pell Grants, to give them resume-worthy work experience for students who have to work while still making sure their academic outcomes are strong and the academics come first. And as we'll talk about later on, that's not always the case. My experience is also back in the Stone Ages. My college search was not carried out on a computer. It was a box that I still remember, where I sorted all those. That's when you didn't throw away the things that came in the mail. You actually coveted them. The assessment I took was called the SAT. My brother and I joke, I ended up at Trinity. He ended up at Union. We both ended up at very good schools, almost by accident. But neither of us realized until we got to those schools with students who were much better prepared than us and certainly much wealthier, that you could actually take the SAT twice. Never mind that there was a different test as well. My mother probably won't see this. We figured if you showed up and hadn't drank the night before and you had 2 number 2 pencils, you were killing it on the SAT. That's where I came from. And I must have done okay. I could still tell you what I was wearing the first day of college because I had never heard of a BMW. And by my senior year, 3 of my roommates were driving brand new BMWs. And the day I moved in, the young woman who moved in the suite across the hall from me, her, I think, moving company took every stitch of furniture out of the dorm room. And not only did she have a whole Laura Ashley coordinated bed set, I had never seen such a thing in North Adams, Massachusetts, I'm telling you. She had brand new furniture. I have no idea what happened sophomore year. But to this day, my parents have never had as nice of a bed ensemble as she did. And if I told you her name, you couldn't make it up. But in the 1980s, a path to a college like that, whether your parents worked at Morgan Stanley and your godfather was Donald Trump, which one of my roommates, I found out later, her godfather was Donald Trump. She probably doesn't admit that today. Or you were just Jane, right, who got there by whatever way, being sober on the day you took your SATs. That was a pathway to a transformational college experience. My children have grown up in a very different economic reality, even though we raised them 6 miles from the house that my parents still lived in for my entire childhood and that my mom is still at today. But that's not the reality for kids from my same hometown following the same path, and I'm trying to change that.
Thank you. So, Dan, let me start with you. So, ECMC has really made great strides and done amazing work around trying to change the narrative for young people. In your Question the Quo campaign, and shout out to Laura wherever she is, I know that was her brainchild, so well executed and has seen great success in helping people rethink what a path beyond college should mean. Can you talk a little bit about that work and why ECMC took that on as such a monumental goal?
Yeah, happy to. We launched this public awareness campaign called Question the Quo just before the pandemic struck. It was entirely coincidental, but we were in the field in late 2019 surveying teenagers about their thoughts about college. So we have data from prior to the pandemic, in the early days of the pandemic, and then coming out of the pandemic, because we wanted to hear what that student voice was. We've been talking a lot over the prior 25 years at ECMC about supporting some of these underserved, under-resourced students, but we wanted to hear directly from them. And it was really interesting because as we've had some of these surveys every 6 or 9 months, the data has changed. In the early days of the pandemic, there was a discounting of the importance of post-secondary education. That's rebounded after the pandemic. But one of the things that we've learned is people are thinking, particularly students, are thinking about post-secondary education a lot. they're thinking that traditional post-secondary education, whether it's Trinity or Hamlin or wherever they ended up going, they're thinking of different paths towards post-secondary education. The idea that it should lead to a career, it should lead to workforce, is something that is much more heavily on their mind now than it was back in the 1900s. And so with this whole idea of understanding the student voice has been really important for us as we think about how we approach these students. And I'll just give you one statistic here. One of our last surveys suggested that only 13% of the respondents were confident in their decision. They're thinking about a lot of things, but they're confident in very little of what they're thinking about. Some of the things they're thinking about include basic needs. And it's not just where am I going to live or how am I going to eat. They're now thinking that healthcare, and particularly mental health, is part of that basic need package, and the destigmatizing of mental health for young people today is just a huge benefit. And I think that what we're seeing is students are starting to pay a lot more attention and are thinking about that a lot more.
Thanks, Dan. And one of the challenges and the pressures on young people now is because they don't feel like they have the resources and tools to navigate this complex process, right? So can you talk a little bit, Connor, about how Cooter tries to solve that and the work that you're doing in states to really make sure that states have the resources to provide to local districts?
So Cooter works on different categories of partnerships. So we work direct with the districts at state level or at federal levels. And we do see a disparity of resources being deployed within these systems. So the districts that can afford the more sophisticated resources, they're able to put the staff that's needed to be able to have the direct coaching. And then you find, the rural communities or the under, served communities are unable to have access to the same tools. So when we're able to do it at the state level, we can provide a little bit more of an equitable solution across, but that's not always perfect because it doesn't always lead to government efficiencies, right? The ability to make it happen well for all. So seeing organizations come together and really not have an ego at the table about how we're delivering the tools has been very powerful for us. There certainly has been a big shift in the awareness, as Dan's talking about, with post-secondary education being at the forefront of the conversation. But we also see employers coming to us saying, we want to get our resources in front of kids. But maybe not quite yet understanding the expectations of what happens in those ages 16 to 18 because they're looking to hire someone, right? So being able to continue to support the conversation between the employer and the student expectation. We had one story where a large employer in my home state of Iowa said, hey, we're not working with that big school district down the street because, the kids come unprepared, they don't have what they need. And then we talked to that partner at the school district, and they said, do you have any idea how hard it is to get those kids to show up on time, So let's level set our expectations and make sure that we're providing services. I'll go Dan's route with a statistic. Our research faculty had done a study a few years ago that by fourth grade, roughly 76% of kids are more confident about what they can't do than what they can do. So that aligns pretty nicely to Dan's statistic there. And that's really important to us to say that as we do think about building these systems, the investment towards earlier childhood awareness, because of the way that the graduation diplomas are changing now, where you're having to jump into that career earlier in the process, it is important that we get those resources available at a younger age than we typically have legislated for in the past. So I am seeing some states move very rapidly, and I'm seeing other states, catching up in terms of the sophistication of the resources available.
So one thing you said that employers are saying they aren't prepared and they don't have what we need. So Jane, I know that's an area, that's the problem that you're ultimately trying to solve, right? So how is education work using work-based learning experience to help young people understand their career options and to navigate those options?
And one thing I want to say is we run into a lot of the same issues. A lot of our students, and we've actually seen a significant increase in the last several months of students coming to us with issues around food insecurity, domestic violence issues seem to have increased. So certainly whenever we start to see weakness in the economy, our most vulnerable populations tend to have vulnerability issues. The one thing I would just say that gets my dander up. We're trying to treat our students who are the most economically at risk in a school or university like a D1 athlete. If you're a D1 athlete at any college or university, the university has a financial incentive to mitigate all the conflicts in your day. And so it's called the division of duty at Williams. I'm sure it's something similar. So somebody is navigating on your behalf conflicts between academics and work. And so yes, it's hard to get students to show up on time, and certainly showing up is 90% or whatever we say. And we recognize that can be an issue for our students, but rather than blaming the student or assigning some stereotype, one of the things we do in partnering with universities and colleges is to realize our students have economic issues. Therefore, transportation isn't always reliable. Therefore, they're already juggling a 20-hour-a-week schedule that we know, if we're not mitigating conflicts with academics, is an indicator that they're not going to finish their degree on time because they're having to go report to work in order to feed themselves or to have housing. So we not only make their schedule flexible so that they can work when they're not supposed to be in school, or they can work 16 hours this week because they have a big paper or something due, but we partner with universities to get facilities that are proximate to campus so that those distances to travel, both to balance their workload. And the reason I say D1 athletes, do many of you know the big secret about D1 athletes? They give them scooters, right? Like, so we have no issue making sure we give actual transportation and scooters to D1 athletes so they can get where they're supposed to be on time. And so when we assign this, like, well, you know, your kids can't get to work on time, they are juggling a lot.
Yeah.
And so the skills, once they get there, we have students who report their communication is better, their problem solving. You get those through work, but we also have to make sure that we are being realistic about under what circumstances students can actually do the real work, achieve academic outcomes, but also be upskilling at the same time.
You talk a little bit about like the coaching model in particular. I know you've had issues where coaches had to step in and say, that's not the appropriate way to talk to, you know.
So because we're doing real work and our employers, Intuit, Discover, who we're not allowed to publish, so if there are any reporters here, don't say I said Discover, but we have very large employers, and our students are doing the same work that they're either doing internally or that other outsourced providers are doing, and we're held to the same standards. And so we monitor and do quality assurance. And so sometimes we have like a student who technically very proficient, giving all the right advice, but they may be talking to someone. This is a real example that we monitor a call, and Mike starts to get a little bit upset because he's not understanding the directions. And so I come from a different culture. I'm trying to relate to Mike, and I start calling him bro. And Mike does not believe that this is a statement of connection. And so as Mike gets more upset, I bro him more, and things really degrade from there. Now, we all find that funny, right, and understand why that didn't work. But if you don't know, like if that's worked in your interactions with a peer or people that you've spoken for before, you don't understand why that wasn't working until someone, and so we have invested a lot in our supervisors and helping them to understand how to have those difficult conversations, how to teach those skills. We also are hopeful to do a lot more upskilling in AI coaching, but it's you know, Katie Jenner's done a lot of this work in Indiana at the high school level. It's easy to identify the skills students don't have. What we are trying to break through with is how do you increase those skills in the work setting, and our students self-report, their skills are growing in the work setting. The piece we still have to get to is how do they then translate how the skills I'm learning now will help me get to the job I want later. That's the gold ring.
Yeah. So, Marie, Jane works with employers that sort of get that they have a role to play in helping young people get where they need to be. You spend a lot of time at Schultz thinking about that employer setting and how they are helping or possibly harming the navigation journey of young people. American Opportunity Index is something you have spent a lot of time with over the years. Can you explain about how that works and why that's a priority?
Yeah, and I'll give a little bit of background. I think just as Jane was mentioning, this idea of work and what you can learn from work, especially in some of your early jobs, we probably back in 2018 really felt like jobs could be transformative in a young person's life. It's a place where you learn self-efficacy. It's a place where you understand who you are and what you can contribute. And it's a place where you can learn some of the skills that Jane just outlined that are so critical to future success. And so when we thought about young people who didn't go from high school to college, but went from high school to career, or high school to nothing, we really thought, how can we connect those young people to jobs so that they can have this transformative experience? And we created something called 100,000 Opportunities, which essentially was a huge national effort to connect young people with limited experience to employers to help them get on that pathway. And what we found, we had 53 companies involved in this, and well more than 100,000 young people were hired as part of the effort. When we went back and looked at the data to understand what the impact was and to see whether our hypothesis about a job being transformational was in fact correct, what we found was that half of young people went on to better paying jobs and half didn't. And half literally churned in entry-level jobs. And there was a statistic that I heard during that period that has always stuck with me, which is the average work experience for somebody in an entry-level job is 7 years. And so I don't ever want us to forget that there are a group of people in our country that are on a stepping stone to future success, and there are a group of people that are churning in entry-level minimum wage jobs. And what is the difference between those people that are stepping up and those people that are churning? And what we found in our research is that oftentimes the onus of that is on the young person. They didn't show up on time. They didn't have the right skills. When in fact, what we saw is there's a very clear difference by company. And so in short, who you work for matters. If that young person went to go work for company A, it would have been a very different life experience than if they had worked for company B. We know that when it comes to college. We know that when it comes to post-secondary. We don't talk about it when it comes to employers. And oftentimes, we let employers simply tell us in workforce or in education what needs to change, as opposed to putting a spotlight on employers and saying, what is it that you can change so that you can become a pathway in someone's life? We call this disconnect a broken marketplace. There are broken pieces across all of it, including with employers. What we also found, and I spent a lot of my early career working with community colleges and school districts, we also found that working with employers, those of us who have been in this space and have tried to, enact change with community colleges or with K through 12 school districts, enacting change with employers is incredibly difficult. Like, it is very, very hard. And so we thought, what if we put some air cover around this problem? What if we said to folks, let's put a spotlight on the roles employers can and should play in the trajectory of their employees' careers? And so that led us to the American Opportunity Index, where we literally ranked employers based on how well they create opportunity for their employees. Or in business speak, how well are you investing in your employees so they can create more value for the company? And so we have done that for the last 3 or 4 years. You can go to AmericanOpportunityIndex.org and look at the companies. And when you look at that data, 80% of the occupations listed, 80% of the folks in those occupations don't have college degrees, because we thought it was very important to put a spotlight on employers in terms of how they're investing in young people who don't have those 4-year degrees. And like, as a side note, and hopefully there's no press here, we did do a first cut years ago where we included those with 4-year degrees. And honestly, it wasn't that interesting, because what you found was like well-resourced tech companies who hire from well-resourced colleges, those people actually have the greatest economic mobility.
We have a little joke that nobody gets hired or fired for making a bad hire from Dartmouth.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. But, so one last point on this is that while we have seen a great deal of success with the American Opportunity Index, there is still much more work that needs to be done to put pressure on employers. And we actually don't think that we're going to get to where we need to be in terms of employers seeing themselves as part of this value chain unless we give the data to workers and to job seekers in a way that it's clear that job seekers have the opportunity to vote with their feet. And so this year, we're actually going to introduce a new version of the Opportunity Index that will be at the occupation level. So you'll be able to understand company performance based on the occupation that you're the most interested in, so that workers will be able to make decisions based on the occupations that, where they have the greatest deal of interest. And if you think about that, and I'll just throw out our own, DNA company, Starbucks, that might be a great place, and in fact, it is a great place for a barista to work. If you go to work as a barista, there is value that's added, and you will be economically mobile. People you are invested in as an employee, and you do better after you work at Starbucks. You do better after you work at Chipotle. But you might not do better. I don't know if this is true or not. You might not do better as an accountant at Starbucks. You might do better at Lowe's as an accountant. And so that's why we will differentiate by occupation, and that will be available later this year.
What has been the reaction from the employer community on this information? Do they agree? Are they hesitant to?
Okay, well, okay. With a ranking, guess who likes it the most?
Whoever's at the top.
Like the top 50 companies, they love it. Those at the bottom 50, they're like, how does this data work exactly? I'm not sure about the methodology yet. So that's where we're, and that's like the good and the bad of any kind of ranking system is you really engage those at the top, but those that need the most movement, it's harder to engage them. So we're also this year going to move away from just a strict ranking where there's like a 1, 2, and 3, and more to a platinum gold, so that more companies will start to engage and see value. And so all that will be coming later this year.
That's great. So I know, Dan, in addition to the narrative change campaign, there's a lot of effort that you're doing to build resources for young people and bring people into the process of building those, because the youth voice, as you say, is so critically important to understand what it is they truly need. So I know you're doing some work in Minnesota to do that. What does that look like on the ground?
Yeah, so we took a look in our own backyard, and in Minnesota, you think it's a great educational system, which it is, but there's an embarrassing amount of disparity along race and socioeconomic lines in terms of educational attainment, income, and lots of metrics that matter for society. And so we took a look at what that ecosystem would look like. And there's really two factors that are important to this discussion. Number one, there are more Fortune 500 companies per capita in Minnesota than there are anywhere else. And it's diverse, right? So it's retail from Best Buy and Target, healthcare, manufacturing, food, et cetera. Very diverse, very sophisticated economy. Number two, our working age population over the next 10 years, according to the Minnesota State Demographer, is expected to grow at 0.0%. And that's a real problem. When you put all of those factors together, that's an issue for us. So one of the things that we did is took a step back and we looked at the ecosystem between the supply side and the demand side and tried to figure out how we could work that connective tissue better. And one of the things we did was we brought a group of youth from North Minneapolis, a very underserved, high minority community, into the office and helped and worked with them to help us co-create solutions for this. So we piloted a program that we call CoLab, and we brought the youth in to help us create that. Again, back to the earlier comments, they're very concerned not only about transportation and basic needs, but also things like how do we get mental health services to this population within this program that we're developing. And then we brought employers to help them understand what a youth-centered design looks like. So back to the point of calling Mike bro, we wanted to make sure that our employers understand, sorry Mike, that our employers understand that this is how you work with a culturally diverse population. We had great success from our first pilot. We're moving to a beta this coming year in 2 different locations. And there's just a lot of excitement with community-based organizations, with employers, with post-secondary ecosystem in Minneapolis. And that's something that we're really going to focus on over the next year is how do we continue to focus on this youth-centered design.
That's really exciting. So that brings me to, surprisingly, our final question. But I'd love to get a response from all of you on the role of that really deep need for personal connection in a lot of this work, balanced with the need for technology in order to scale it. And that is ultimately the challenge, right? A lot of this is so personal in a young person's journey that it needs to have a lot of individual attention. And yet, in order to scale it effectively, we need high-quality technology resources. How do you think about that at Cooter? Let's start with you.
A couple comments with what Marie and Dan are saying as it relates back to the question is that when I think about the states that we serve, the majority of the employed individuals work for a small business. And so this investment is, this conversation becomes a lot easier when you're a Fortune 500 company and you have the resources available to participate in it. But if you're a small business saying, I just need to hire somebody, how can I participate in this ecosystem becomes a big challenge. So our way of helping solve that is by bringing together the right parties and then creating an equitable delivery of the technology and the solutions. So bringing together, kind of the solid players in the market that can provide examples for this. Because I think of a friend of mine who owns a small manufacturing company. He's like, I need welders. I can't compete with John Deere. What do I do? Well, I'm like, well, have you gone and visited your local high school? No. All right, let's start there, and there's a system that you can tap into, put one opportunity in, and now you've participated in the ecosystem. So I think awareness that there are tools out there for these, across the board here will help us scale up the solution, because that is where the majority of employees will end up, is some of these small businesses that don't have the same level of resources that the larger organizations do.
Right.
Yeah, I think this is a perennial problem. Even back in the old tech days, I think we're bullish on AI, and we're bullish on AI to help to begin to solve some of these issues. I think the critical question, especially when it comes to navigation, that I don't think we yet have an answer to, is to really understand how to deploy those human resources effectively, so that we know there's a limited bandwidth, there's a limited time and capacity. How do we make sure that we're maximizing the return on all of those minutes, and then using technology where and how it makes the most sense? I feel like in the actual learning space, they are doing a lot of good research around understanding what makes sense for the AI tool during the learning day, and where and how does the teacher be deployed. And I think we need to do the same thing in the navigation space. And I don't think we're there yet, but I think that is the challenge yet to come and yet to be solved.
I think it comes down to 3 things. It's data, data, and data. And I'll make a plug for the Virginia Office of Education and Economics, who really started with 2 people, $500,000, and they created this system where they had a common data language between employers, students, families. Once everybody is talking with the same language, I think that's how we scale, and that's how we transcend the importance of individual discussions here.
Great. Jane?
Yeah, I was going to say it's both and. So we have over 700 students working for us. We're growing our student population at about 30 to 40% a year. Having folks doing the research and getting the data. So I did a note for myself, because I'm old, about your American Opportunity Index, because that's the kind of information. AI is great at taking a bunch of different information and using it in pathways and job search and job exploration, and getting it in a democratized way to individuals so they can personalize their pathway, and then individuals can come in and help you on the refinement and how you use that personalized information. And so that's kind of how we're looking at it as we scale. So thank you for doing that work. And thank you for being the person advocating for employers to change their behavior, because I sometimes do that, but I really shouldn't be the person doing that because I really need to be nice to them to get them to give me more jobs. Which is why the last thing, I know we're out of time, that I want to make sure to say, all our broing aside, our students are competing against adults in full-time roles, working on a part-time basis or graduating at the same rate as their peers. We beat the adults, so if you use the D1 analogy again, we're winning the national championship in basketball and football and baseball every single year. We've given them the scooters, we've given them the time to do their schoolwork, and we're killing it. So if you have a pool on the best work-based learning program, our students at Education at Work are winning it.
Thank you, Jane. And clearly there's a long way to go in this conversation, a lot more to discuss, and partners that are willing to work towards finding solutions to all these challenges. So I look forward to more to come, and I appreciate you all participating today. Thank you.
Thank you.